Yes, so let's begin and let's dive in that the root of our learning should help to finally bring home all of the hostages and protect our soldiers and Am Yisrael, all of the innocents, bring a speedy end to all of our wars and be Louis Neshama for my mother, Shalom Aleichem Bas, Menachem Mendel ve'Rachel.
Amen.
Okay, so we're achingly close to the end of this sugya, but I'm going to just do a quick roundup of some of the main points that we got through last time so that we don't start completely cold. I have to tell you, I always wonder how these people who do Daf Yomi manage to do it, because anyway, I guess that's a separate discussion. I listened in, I half listened in into Daf Yomi shir because it was in the same, it's being given in the same room that I was just going over the parsha. And the person who did it was mainly reading from the English Koran translation, but he had prepared it beforehand, so he was able to give like a very smooth delivery. Uh, I, but still, I don't know. Like you see our our sugya without being critical of other people's learning, because you get what you get from whatever you get from a Daf Yomi shir. And depends on which shir you go to and how much they go into it and how much time you have. And, this is part of what I was discussing with Michael Werner. You get out of it what you put into it. So in our case, why don't I want to pick up just from exactly where we left off last time? Because we're still essentially in the middle of the sugya. So if I just start reading without doing a little bit of review, I'm afraid that everyone, including me, will lose track of what we're talking about. So what we were talking about was Rabbi Yochanan. That's really what we were talking about. Rabbi Yochanan, who came down with Tzafidna, and he ended up getting a remedy for that he could use on Shabbos. And the Gemara here is concerned about what the source for Rabbi Yochanan's action was. That is, the fact that Rabbi Yochanan himself was taking a remedy on Shabbos indicates that it must be the that this malady of Safidna is something that was considered to be dangerous, which is a particular halachic category when it comes to how we treat it on Shabbos. So if it's something that's dangerous, that is, it's physically dangerous, the implication is it's dangerous enough that if left untreated, the person could become severely ill and even die. Not that he's imminently in danger of death, but again, if it's left untreated, the person could ultimately die as a result of this disease. And so we want to know, how does Rabbi Yochanan on what basis does Rabbi Yochanan paskin that you can take a remedy for tzafidna even on Shabbos? So we
Actually,
understand.
can I
Go
interject really quickly?
Sure.
It seems to me that, I mean, sort of thinking about, particularly in light of what follows, that there are two issues. One, is there sakana? And second, is the remedy going to work? Or is there at least a reasonable expectation that the remedy will work or could work?
Well, the main, so I would put it like this. In other words, the issue is if there's sakana, then one is allowed to take a remedy. The 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 question then there will be a question about the nature of the remedy. That is, if it's a remedy that considered to be a proper remedy, then yes, then you'll be allowed to take it even on Shabbos. If it's not a proper remedy, then you're not allowed to take it on Shabbos. But since you raised that, actually, there were two things that I wanted to bring up. One of them is really a tertiary issue about what we mean by what the Gemara means by the term Hatzer Kaved. Talk about that in a moment, because Michael Werner, you like to translate that as the lobe of the liver, which may or may not be the case. Uh, but it could be that. Well, I'll just say there's another concept that the Hatzer Kaved actually refers to a sheet of a fatty sheet that surrounds the liver. The word Hatzer itself, right, means a yard, like an expanse. And it could be that that's what it's referring to. That's a bit of anatomy that's not vital for us right now, but just as a linguistic point. In
It
terms
shows
of,
up in the corporate note. I mean,
I'm
that's,
sorry.
I mean, this term shows up, in discussions of the corporate note.
Yes, it
I mean,
does.
that's where I recall seeing the translation "lobe of the liver," which may or not be the best translation.
Right.
That's
That may or may not be true. There like I said, there's some people who say that it refers to this little part of the liver that sticks out. But then what I found out about that is actually there are a couple. If you look the liver of of an animal that's brought for a korban, there are actually a number of sections that stick out. It's not like a circle that has like one little thing sticking out. So then the question is, which one is the chatzer? Which one is and I don't know in English about I'm not trying to translate the English back into the Hebrew, but I'm just saying it's just something to bear in mind. I'm not exactly sure what it means, but in terms of your point though, yes. So the other point I want to make about this question of the efficacy of uh, of the remedy, I didn't do this in the past when we were learning the Mishnah, but just one second, I'll show you what the Rambam says. Here we go. So I'm glad you mentioned it. Oops, sorry, that's not what I'm looking for. Hello, Paul, how are you?
Okay. You hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
greetings. So you're a little bit late, but not so late because we're just doing a very quick overview. But as I say, I was doing a little bit of housekeeping here. Yeah, let me share this screen with you. So the Rambam in the parish on the Mishnah, in the parish on our Mishnah, that is Misha Chasov Humus. When he gets to the parish of to explain Rabbi Matya ben Charash. So let's take a second because this is going to be important for us later in the shir today. So what did we talk about? Mishnah shachal chalev shoteh in machilinaton mechatzer kaved shelo. We can see how they translate. It's an interesting thing. Yeah, here they say the lobe of the liver, like you do. So that's one terush. Mishnah shachal chalev shoteh in machilinaton mechatzer kaved shelo. Rabbi Matya ben Charash matir. Right, so by now we're all familiar with this, and but what do we understand from the Mishnah? That this is a machloket between Rabbi Mati ben Barash and the Tanakama. So the Tanakama holds that from the beginning of the Mishnah, somebody who has bulmus, we feed him even barim tameim, even things that aren't kosher, until his eyes light up. Someone who's bit by a rabid dog or a mad dog, we don't feed him from the chatzer kaved of the dog. But Rabbi Matya ben Marash permits that. So what's their machloket at the time when we learned it, at least in one of the iterations of our learning? So I pointed out there's something strange about this, right? Because later on in the Mishnah, it's going to say kol safek nefashot dochet Shabbat. So what's the machloket between Rabbi Matya ben Charash and the Chachamim? Because if there's even Rabbi Matya ben Charash who permits it, he seems to think that at least it might help. And since there's safek nefashot, I should allow it, even if I'm not sure if it's going to help. And the Chachamim don't allow it. So I can turn on them. Like, why wouldn't they allow something? Because even if there's some percentage chance that it might work, shouldn't they allow the person to be treated with that? So the Rambam views it like this, and of course, bearing in mind that the Rambam himself was a physician, he says, "Ein halachak Rabbi Mati ben Charash shehitir lahachil et ha'adam biyom tzom kippur yoter kaved." Halach is not like Rabbi Mati ben Charash that permits to feed a person on Yom Kippur the yoter kaved of the mad dog if he bit. Mivnei sheino mo'il ela b'derech skula. It only helps by way of a skula. What does the Rambam mean by that? So we'll flesh this out in a moment. Chachamim say, "Ein ovrin al mitzvah ela beripui bilvad shu davar barur shahigayon v'nisayon hapashut mechayvin oto." Chachamim hold that we don't transgress a mitzvah. In other words, we don't allow someone or even make somebody transgress a mitzvah like eating something that's a davar tameh. We don't do that except if there's a remedy of which we know for certain, where it's clear, and that logic and experience and simple experience, simple logic and experience uh, make it necessary. In other words, make it obvious that this is something that will have efficacy. Of a haripui biskulot lo. Giving someone a remedy based on a skula, no. So what does he mean by a skula? So the Rambam understood that there were certain things that people did as a remedy, not because they were based on, I'm going to impose upon or project on the Rambam something like the way we think of a scientific method. So you see, the Rambam says there's such a thing as a ripui that's based on logic and experience. The Rambam doesn't detail what that means, but we could understand what that means if that there's a certain logic to doing it, meaning based on the way we understand this disease and based on the way we understand how disease is remedied, we treat in a certain way. That's the logic part. And then the experience part is experience to see if that treatment actually works. So if we know that it makes sense to use a particular treatment, and we also know by experience that the treatment works, or at least has a chance of working, then we will use that. And that means that we'll use it even when it would be otherwise forbidden by halacha. But if it's based on a skula, so skula here, I'm not sure exactly how to translate it, but meaning it's based on uh, something like, for lack of a better term, he means things that would be either magical or things that have some kind of a spiritual relevance that people might associate with this disease, but it's not based on our physical knowledge of the problem, and it and and maybe also doesn't have any experiential evidence to back it up. And he says we don't use skula lefishin yanam chalush because their matter is weak. Lo yichayvu lo yichayveu hayigayon. They're not perforce things that are logical. V'nisyono rachok, and its trial or its experience is far. In other words, it's far removed from the actual problem. V'hita anamin hatoen ba. Zeklau gadol da'ehu. This is a great uh, general principle. You should know it. So the Rambam this is how the Rambam differentiates between uh, two kinds of rifuot, which one could argue also persist to this day, depending on how you understand skula. But in our day and age, we have things that something we call people like to call Western medicine. I think Western medicine people like to call it evidence-based medicine. And then there are other kinds of refuot that are based on different concepts. Now, but and I'm not going to go into a discussion, but uh, you know, well, we don't have to get into it. Of course, there are other long-held medical practices from China, from India, they're different that are based on different systems, which in fact might fit the Rambam's definition of something that's based on logic and experience, as opposed to appealing to different kinds of uh, demons or spirits. For example, like to take an extreme example, it's not clear here what's going on with the Chatzer Kaved. Why specifically the Chatzer Kaved? If I were,
Could I jump in here really quickly?
yeah, let me just say one more thing. What's interesting to me about the using something from the dog itself to cure the person, even though this is not likely what the people were thinking at the time, although I don't know what they were thinking at the time. But in fact, the way Louis Pasteur developed first vaccine for rabies, it was based on taking a virus, an attenuated sample of the virus from the dog, and injecting it into the afflicted person. So there's a bit of an irony there. In any event, Michael Werner, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I only wanted, I mean, this may or may not be relevant, but in humoric medicine, the liver was regarded as the seat of madness.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, very good.
Somebody who was mad was melancholic.
Mm-hmm.
And so, this almost sounds like homeopathy.
This was
Mm-hmm.
I mean, which
Uh-huh.
I mean, and then and there are passages in Tanakh that kind of seem to, at least on Peshat level, seem to echo that. The bitter wood thrown into the bitter water.
Yeah, well, that sounds, yeah. Oh, I see, because that sounds like homeopathy. I think actually it's one of the things that I think I've heard a homeopath quote that to me. Yeah,
Which which is not, which is
Mm-hmm.
that may be something very, very different, but it could be that, by segula, he means this kind of, associative thinking.
Do you know that may be, and I'm not sure, but skula to me seems to indicate something else. But I'm really not sure because, of course, the Rambam was familiar with the concept of humors. I think that was I think that was probably or possibly a basis for his own work as a physician. I know very little about his work as a physician. I know that I just started to look into it again recently. A number of years ago, somebody published his works. They translated his medical works from which he wrote in Judeo-Arabic. They were translated into Hebrew. Um, and over the last few weeks, I've been looking at different ancient remedies and different approaches for curing rabies, uh, which anybody can look up. It's not that hard. You can look up and see different approaches to it. I was actually looking to see if anybody suggested using, if this was other than the Gemara. I don't know if anybody used this lobe of the liver, the Chatzer Kaved. I'm not sure. Paul, yes. What did you want to say?
And according to a modern perspective, the Rambam should be read. You should be more careful because they also have this placebo effect. So even if it's not, if the medicine that from a scientific point of view doesn't work, it may nevertheless have a good effect. I don't think for the rabies, but maybe in other circumstances.
That raises a very interesting question about using a placebo to help somebody on Shabbos, but we won't get into that. We might ultimately get into it, but the reason I was mentioning it here is because, again, because this machloket between Rabbi Matya ben Charash and the Chachamim, on the face of it, doesn't make sense because, how could it be that one Chacham says that we allow you to violate a din Torah to have this remedy, and the Chachamim say no, at a time when everybody agrees that Safek Nefashot is Docha Shabbos, it's generally Docha other Isurim in the Torah. So why wouldn't you allow it, even if you weren't sure? That is, based on what we would say, Safek Nefashot. This is a question that we're going to get into because we haven't gotten up to the Gemara that talks about it in greater detail. But let's consider just the terminology. What does it mean, Safek Nefashot? What do I mean by that? Kol Safek Nefashot Docha to Shabbat. So, what's a Safek? Safek is a doubt. So, how do I look at any doubt? So here? Rabbi Matya ben Charash says, he further said, Choshesh bigrono metilin lo sam b'toch biv b'Shabbat. This is the main thing that we're discussing now in our sugya. Mipnei shu safek nefashot, because it's safek nefashot. So what's safek nefashot? What's safek nefashot? What is that referring to?
The disease might kill him.
It's the disease. So choshesh bigrono is safek nefashot. Someone who's stricken by some disease, which we understand in the Gemara, they're talking about safitna, or it may be other diseases like safitna. Now, their life is in danger, and there's a doubt in our mind about if there's a doubt in our mind about whether they will live or die unless we treat them. So kol safek nefashot dochet Shabbat. Anybody there's a doubt about whether somebody is going to live or die, that's a level of sakana that tells us that we push away the Shabbos, right? We set Shabbos aside and we will treat them even on Shabbos.
So the safek is
So-
about the illness, not about the medicine, if it's effective or not.
So the Safek Nefashot immediately refers to the illness. But once I know that that's true,
But the Rambam doesn't talk about the illness itself. He talks about the efficiency of the remedy.
right, but that's a necessary corollary.
That may also be a safek.
Okay, so in other words, so if I have a remedy about which I'm doubtful whether or not it will work, I have a doubt about whether or not the remedy will work. So first we could say that in principle, we could say that about any remedy, right? But what we would, if we, statistically, we'll put it on a certain scale, right? Well, so let's say certain remedies have a very high probability of working. And why do I say that? Because they fit into what the Rambam's definition that they're both higayon and nisayon, right? They're both logical, and it's based on what we know about the disease and based on what we know about how the remedy works. And we also have tried it in the past. The reason we don't know for sure if it'll work is because as every person knows, and I'm sure every physician knows, every person is different. So let's say there's a statistical probability that most people fall out in the biggest part of the bell curve. But there are always going to be people for whom something won't work, right? There's a small percentage chance that it won't work. But we'll say given a high percentage chance that it'll work, so that's something that will push away Shabbos. But if it's a small percentage chance, so what do I say? I still have safek nefashot. So kol zman, so this was my question. Kol zman that I have a doubt about this person's life, right? Whether they're going to live or die based on uh, their medical condition left untreated. So then I should say anything that might help should be administered. So even if it has a low chance of working, it should be administered. Which, by the way, given the little bit that I know from my little bit of research, like the way people, the way our Mishnah ends up is we don't have a reliable treatment for rabies. That's what ends up, right? So Rav Mati ben Charash is matir to give the Chatzer Kaved, and the Chachamim aren't matir. So based on halacha, I would say we have to paskin like the Chachamim, which means there is no cure. And the little bit that I saw, that the way people did try to treat it, and there were various ways of treating it in different parts of the world. They all had a very low chance of working, meaning probably none of them really worked. In other words, we could say that now. Probably none of the treatments actually worked, but sometimes people just recovered. And so, you couldn't, it goes back also to the placebo question, or, sometimes it's better to do nothing. We don't know. But the reason to come back to the Rambam, the reason the Rambam makes this distinction is he's trying to learn pshat in the Mishnah, because otherwise the Mishnah itself doesn't make sense. Because of my question, this is how I see it. Because of my question, if there is even a doubt that the Chatzer Kaved might work, then I should administer it. Everybody should say I should administer it. So the Rambam says there are remedies and there. I'll give you a second, Michael. There are remedies and there are remedies. So there's certain remedies that are tried and true, and they make sense, and there are other remedies that are skulot, and they don't make sense. And since they don't make sense, then we don't allow you to therefore be over on an Isur Torah. The corollary from that in the Rambam is if they don't involve an Isur Torah, then I would allow you. even if it has a very low chance of working, even if it's a skula. That could be something I get from the Rambam. Michael, please go ahead.
Yeah, just in modern pharmaceutical trials, there are two issues. One, does the remedy work? And second, is the remedy dangerous? And so I'm
Well,
wondering if the fact that there's an Isur for the Hatzer Kaved may in fact have to do with the fact that it's dangerous. That actually
it
might do
could,
both.
no, you're right, and I don't know the only thing I can surmise. I think the only thing that we can surmise from it coming up in the mission, from it being Mati ben Charash, is that people thought it worked at least some of the time. I think, so more than that, we can't say. In other words, it's not arbitrary. One of the things that we get from we've looked now at a few different, illnesses or maladies that afflict people, including jaundice and including rabies, including scurvy or tafidna. um, people knew that people saw and they had diagnoses for these particular problems, for these particular illnesses, and what they the fact that this comes up, that that feeding the afflicted person the chatzer kaved comes up as a possible remedy. The only issue is apparently, and you may be right. The only issue that's presented in the Mishnah is since there's an isur Torah to eat the chatzer kaved of a dog, of any dog, should I be allowed to nonetheless override that isur to give it to this person to save their life? And so the Chachamim say no, and Rabbi Mati ben Chorash says yes. Rabbi Mati ben Chorash says yes. According to the Rambam, why does Rabbi Mati ben Chorash say yes? Because he holds that even refuot that are based on skula are also things that you can administer, and that they will be docha Shabbos or docha Isurei Torah even in this circumstance. And the Chachamim say no. According to the Rambam, only refuot of higayon v'nisayon are allowed. That's how the Rambam understands the distinction. He doesn't. I'm just saying based on the Rambam and the other Meforshim also. Nobody brings up in this particular case what you're saying, although it might be true. In other words, there may be a danger in taking it, because we know it's true of other remedies. Sometimes the Rambam was certainly aware of this, right? That I think one of the Rambam's treatises actually is on poisons and their antidotes, if I remember correctly. People know, physicians knew that certain remedies that could be administered might be dangerous. They might be worse than the disease itself. People were aware of that. How well they were at making the judgment call is a different question, but they were aware of that. All right. Anyway, that was a big. Okay, I'll let you
One
go
other
ahead.
question. This is much about sort of a general principle as much as about this specific issue.
Mm-hmm.
But it occurs to me that the liver is the one part of the body that's probably hardest to kosher. And so would this be could this be because there's an Isur on top of an Isur? First of all, that's from a katame animal, but second of all, because you're going to be eating blood with it.
That gets into a very interesting question, which we're not going to go into, although I think we had touched on it earlier, and I think we'll come back to it. And that's a question of Isur on top of Isur. And I have to tell you, I'm not sure if it's an Isur on top of an Isur in this case, because I'm not sure if the blood of a behemat tameya, like a calf is a behemat tameya, I'm not sure if that's considered to be an Isur that's on top of the Isur of eating a behemat tameya itself. In other words, to give you another example, if you have a bacon cheeseburger, you're actually only the only Easter is eating the bacon. There isn't an Easter of eating basar b'chalav because uh, uh, meat that comes from a non-kosher animal is not considered to be basar for the purposes of basar b'chalav.
That's
Bacon. Bacon is parv. That's what it means.
This is aside from the burger. Presumably there would be an Easter, of the basar b'chalav related to the cheese and the burger. Never mind the cheese. Never mind the bacon. That's between them.
No, but that's why I say a bacon cheese sandwich. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm thinking of a bacon cheeseburger that only has bacon in it. But you're right. I guess a bacon cheeseburger also has meat in it. So yes, I don't know because it's not something I eat. But having bacon with cheese, or having pork with cheese, or camel meat with cheese, or whatever it is, the only Easter is eating. I mean, unless the cheese itself isn't kosher, but if the cheese is kosher, and the animal meat is from a treif animal, there is no Easter of basar b'chalav. So I'm just bringing it up because I'm not sure if there's more than one Easter with the nevela, or with a behemat tameya, if the Easter of dam is separate from that. And I'm just not sure. I think you may be right that it's also a separate Easter, but I'm not sure because it might just fall into the category of eating a behemat tameya, and any part of the behemat tameya is asur because it's a behemat tameya, not because it's dam. And I'm just not sure. But it's a good question. But I think your point though, even though I I didn't do a deep dive into it, but it does occur to me that I think I think your point about the liver and how it was viewed in terms of the humors, which was a common and concept at the time of Chazal, that makes a lot of sense to me. That would have been a reason why people would turn to the liver of the animal. At least it makes some sense. I don't know, a lot of sense.
Is this something? I mean, I would imagine that the Rambam himself was at least familiar with the humoric medicine.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Background and all that.
The Rambam's background, his approach to medicine, as I understand it, was based on Galen. That was the common that was commonly the way physicians were taught. When he was doing his work, he learned Galen through Arabic translations of Galen, and I believe that Galen also held the Homeric approach to disease. I think you're right about that. But this is way out of my depth.
Shel?
Yeah.
The question here, if you are allowed to eat it on Yom Kippur. And there's another question: are you allowed to eat it on Yom Chol?
Wait, are you allowed to eat what?
This is not the same. What? I don't know.
No, I didn't hear what you said. What are you allowed to eat what?
Here the issue is: are you allowed to eat this liver from the mad dog on Yom Kippur? That's the discussion here. But there's another question: are you allowed to eat it on Yom Chol, on a usual day?
Yes. So this was something that we just talked about.
That's not the same. Well, I think it's not the same question.
Actually,
it may also be a question.
I think if I could jump in really quickly, it just seems to me that maybe that's a misreading. That the question is whether pikuach nefesh overrides a prohibition, whether it's eating a behemat tameya or eating on Yom Kippur. And so it's addressing the general question rather than the specific question.
So the Rambam, what we saw in the Rambam, and I understand this what you're saying. The Rambam says, "Ein halachik Rabbi Mati ben Charash, shitir la'achilat adam b'yom tzom kippur." Right. So the Rambam is immediately associating with Yom Kippur because that's the context of the Mishnah.
Mm-hmm.
But later on, when he talks about the Chachamim, he says, Chachamim omrim, ein ovrin al mitzvah. So he makes it more general. It's according to the way he understands the Chachamim, about which is who we're going to paskin by, that we're not over on a mitzvah, any mitzvah, whether it's Behemat Tameah or whether it's Yom Kippur. So the Rambam extrapolates from that. And so he understands that even though, excuse me, once I say Misha Chazabul Musmachlinoto Fil Dvarim Ad Sheyorod Einav, I could say this whole Mishnah is talking about any day of the year, because it says I give him even Dvarim Tmeim. So the Chiddush here is clearly that I'm giving him Dvarim Tmeim, but since it's brought in the context of Yom Kippur, so that's why the Rambam mentions that here in the context of Yom Kippur, but then he expands it later on. So of course it's true. It'll be true for any day of the year that you're not allowed to feed, according to the Chachamim, you can't give the Chatzer Kaveh to someone who's bit by a Kelev Shotah any day of the year. It just happens that we bring it in the context of Yom Kippur. And that's something that when we were learning the Mishnah, both the first and second times, I think we talked about that. And Seder, it's a relevant question. It's a practical question. So let's go back. Okay, that was a very long digression, but it's a nice discussion. Anybody who has, more to say about ancient approaches to medicine, you're welcome to see. I'm being serious. If you find out anything more that you want to add next time, I would be happy. But I did, like I say, I just did a search for like cures around the. I think I asked like, what are the cures? What were the cures around the world for rabies before the vaccine was developed? And you get this very wide range of approaches, which I won't go through. I remember a couple of them. I won't go through them. Doesn't matter. But none of them brought up feeding the Chatzer Kaveh. So they missed this Mishnah here. Okay, so back to our sugya. So what do we know? So from the Mishnah, this is now deep set in our minds that there's a machloket between Rabbi Matya ben Charash and the Chachamim regarding whether or not you feed the Chatzer Kaved of a rabid dog to someone who is bit by that dog. That we know that machloket exists. We also know that Rabbi Matya ben Charash was matir to give somebody a sam, right? Some kind of an herbal remedy or some kind of a drug, whatever, however you want to translate sam, on Shabbos or on Yom Kippur, which would mean it overrides both Yom Kippur and overrides Shabbos. We know that was something that Rabbi Matya ben Charash was matir, and our first inclination would be that maybe the Chachamim don't agree with him. So now Rabbi Yochanan did take a sam, right? He had this remedy which was described earlier about what it was. He did take this on Shabbos, so we want to know, the Gemara wants to know on what basis. So we know that Rav Chia bar Abba said to Rabbi Yochanan, Kiman, who are you holding like that you took this sam on Shabbos? You must be holding like Rabbi Matya ben Charash, who said, and Rabbi Yochanan replied to him and said, Shani omer bezu v'lo b'acheret. So I say about this, in other words, I paskin like Rabbi Matya ben Charash regarding this psak about metilin sam b'Shabbat, but not about another. So in the Mishnah, what was the other?
Chatzer Kaved.
Chatzer Kaved. So based on, if I only have this keta, I would say that that's what Rabbi Yochanan is saying. I hold like Rabbi Matya ben Charash regarding Sam b'Shabbat, but not about Chatzer Kaved. So then the Gemara said, Lema Messiah. Let's say that this Braita comes as a support for Rabbi Yochanan. And here we said, we bring other maladies, right? So we bring somebody who's stricken by Yerakon, by jaundice, we give him Basar Chamur. Someone who's bit by Kalev Shoteh, we give him Chatzer Kaved. Choshesh Befiv, somebody who has some malady in his mouth, which presumably is or could be Tzafidna, we give him Sam B'Shabbat, Divrei Rabbi Matya ben Charash, and the Chachamim say, Be'elu ein behen mishum refuah. With these, they don't have, these are not effective remedies. So the Gemara understood that Be'elu is a kind of a superfluous word. Chachamim could have just said, Chachamim Osrim, or Lo Matirim, or they could have just said, Ein Behem Mishum Refuah, but they said, Be'elu Ein Behem Mishum Refuah. So that implies that some of them don't constitute refuah, but at least one of them does, right? Why do I say at least one? Because there were three, and then the Chachamim say these aren't refuah. So these implies two. So two of them are not refuah, meaning one of them is refuah, right? That's the Gemara. Be'elu l'mutei mai. So what does that exclude? And there's two of them must be not effective refuah, and therefore Chachamim will not be matir. But one of them must be that they agree that it is a refuah. So my lavi mutei sam. So why don't I say that the Chachamim here, when they said be'elu ein behem mishum refuah, they mean that we're going to exclude the sam, and so that it means the first two for Yerakon and for Kelev Shoteh, those the refuot of Besar Chamur and Chatzer Kaved, those are not refuot, but the Sam b'Shabbat is a refuot. But the Gemara is docha. It says lo lemute makizim dam l'sronchei. Gemara says actually when the Chachamim say be'elu, they're not even referring to something that's in this Braita. They're referring to something elsewhere. They're referring to sronchei. Achinami mistabra. And what's sronchei? So apparently it's diphtheria. It's something like it's diphtheria or something like diphtheria. Hachinami mistabra. So the Gemara says that would make sense to say that that's what the Chachamim meant, because I have another Braita, and I have three things that were said in the name of Rabbi Matya ben Charash. And the first one is Mikizin dam lisronchi b'Shabbat, that we allow bloodletting for sronchi, for someone's afflicted with sronchi, even on Shabbos. Normally, why can't you do bloodletting on Shabbos? We didn't talk about this last time.
It'd be extracting a liquid from a solid, I would guess.
There's a something that comes before that.
Schita.
You're not allowed to make a wound on Shabbos. One of the things you're not allowed to do. And as to why, what's the Ab Malacha? It escapes me right now. I apologize that it escapes me, but you're not allowed to make a chabura on Shabbat. All right, that's for me to get back to you about. I can't believe it just mamash escapes me. It's not schita. Michael Werner, what did you say? Oh, because you're saying you're extracting what? No, that's not it either.
A liquid from a solid.
No. Well, you're not allowed to do shchita on Shabbos. And this is, I think it's a told of shchita. Wow, I have to brush up on that. All right. But in any event, so you're not allowed to do bloodletting on Shabbos. But here, so according to Rabbi Matya ben Charash, You're allowed to do bloodletting because it's a cure for stronchi. So you can do it even on Shabbos. So he says, he also, we have these three things. Kizin dam l'stronchi, someone, and then we have kelev shoten, the chatzer kavein, and we have choshesh b'fiv and the sam. Chachamim also here say be'ela ein behem mishum refuah. So why did I bring this brayta? Because I wanted to support the idea that when the Chachamim said in the first brayta, be'elu ein behem mishum refuah, they meant none of these three things are considered to be effective refuot. But what do they consider to be effective refuah? The nikizin dam l'sronchi b'Shabbat, which I have in this other brayta. And because here also Chachamim say be'elu and behem mishum refuah. So be'elu l'mutei mai, ma'alev tarte batraita. So why did I say they mean here? In other words, here, what are these that they say aren't refuah? It would mean the latter two, the kelev shoteh and the choshesh b'fiv, and it would exclude stronchi. And then that would support what I just said a moment ago, that when the Chachamim said be'elu and behem mishum refuah, they meant none of those three things in the previous brayta are refuah, but kizin dam l'sronchi b'Shabbos, that would be. But actually, the Gemara here is also dochen. It says lo atarte dereisha kamaita el mute deseifa. The Gemara says no. When they say be'elu in the second brayta, they mean that mikizin dam l'sronchi and chatzer kaved, those are not efficacious remedies, so we don't allow you to be over anything for them. But it means that they would allow betilin sam b'Shabbat, which now, in other words, this is where we left off. So now that we come to this idea, which is exactly the opposite of what we started, right? So in the beginning, what did we say? Rav Chia bar Abba wants to say that to Rabbi Yochanan, you must be holding like Rabbi Matya ben Charash, and Rabbi Yochanan says, apparently he says, I hold like him for Metilin Sam b'Shabbat, but not about another. So we thought another, that would be Chatzer Kaved, because that's the other thing that we know that Rabbi Matya ben Charash disagreed with the Chachamim. And now we find out that there are other issues besides Chatzer Kaved and Sam b'Shabbat, and we have one brayta which we would say could indicate, like Rabbi Yochanan, that in the case of Sam b'Shabbat, that the Chachamim agree with Rabbi Matya ben Charash. Then we push that aside and say no, they don't even agree with him about that. But then I bring another brayta to try to support that contention, and then I push that second contention away, which leaves me with the Chachamim, yes, agree with Rabbi Matya ben Charash, if you're following what I'm saying. So I ended off last time by pointing out what's the Parshanut problem here, just a learning problem is, in each of the Braitot, I have three things that Rabbi Matya ben Charash is matir, and the Chachamim apparently don't agree with him about at least two of them. And so I could say, since I don't know which two they're talking about, I can learn the Braita in different ways. So I can learn it either in the first instance, right? I can learn it to try to support the idea that they agree with him about Sam b'Shabbat, but I could also learn it where they disagree with him about it. So what's the point? It's not machriya. I can't bring it as a proof. But the same thing holds for the second Braita. I could say they must agree with him about one thing, but not two other things. And at this point, I end up, and I don't really know. So what I mentioned last time is, in each case where the Gemara says, my love, why don't I say X? And then the Gemara says, no, you say Y. it doesn't mean that the Gemara knows that Y is correct and X is wrong. It means that the Gemara can't prove that X is right or wrong. I could just as easily say X or Y. And since I can just as easily say X or Y, it's not a proof at all. I don't know which is correct, X or Y. And that's really what's ended up by looking at the way the Gemara has examined these braitot. So that brings us up now to where we are in the sugya, and we have a little bit of time. So let's do this. So Michael Schwartz, why don't you read Tashma?
Tashma, Tanya Rabba Bar Shmuel, Ubara Sheharicha Machlin Oto Ad Tashuv Nafsha, Amisha Neshako, Kelev Shote Machlin Oto, Yichatzar Kaved Shalo, Lahachoshesh, Bapiv Mitim Lo Sam, Bishabat, Divrei Rebbe Eliezer, Berebbe Yossi, Shamar Mashum Rebbe Matya ben Charish. V'chachmim omrim bezo v'lo ba'acheret.
Stop.
So
stop. Okay, so just explain this to us.
Okay, come in here. Baraita of Rabba the son of Shmuel, a pregnant woman that smells. We feed her until her soul is settled. Someone who's bitten by a rabid dog, we feed him the part of the liver of the dog, and someone who's stricken with in their mouth, we place in their mouth a drug on Shabbat. These are the words of Rabbi Eliezer Berebbe Yossi, and that was said in the name of Rabbi Matya ben Charish. And the Chachamim, the sages say this and lo, but not another.
Okay, so first of all, why are we bringing this Braita at all? What's the Gemara trying to accomplish?
It's maybe trying to decide between the two earlier Braitot.
Yeah, or right. So ultimately, what we're trying to figure out is we still have our first issue, and our first issue is on what basis did Rabbi Yochanan allow Sam b'Shabbat for tzafidna, and in the aftermath of what we learned now in these two braitot, so what did we end up with? We ended up with I can't answer my question based on these two braitot, because essentially it's not clear how I interpret each of the braitot. I don't understand the Chachamim. I don't know for sure what the Chachamim mean in each of the braitot, and so I still don't know for sure what Rabbi Yochanan's basis was. Was it Rabbi Matya ben Charash? And if not Rabbi Matya ben Charash, then on what basis would it be? The other thing is, which I think we mentioned last time, what was the point? If in the first Braita, Chachamim meant be'elu and not Sam b'Shabbat, meaning that Chachamim, what the point of each of the Braitot, I should have said this when I was doing the recap. The point of bringing the Braitot is to say, not that we paskin like Rabbi Matya ben Charash per se, but that we paskin like Rabbi Matya ben Charash when the Chachamim agreed with him. That was what we were trying to get, because if I just based on the way I've learned the Mishnah until now, I think that Rabbi Matya ben Charash and the Chachamim don't agree about Sam b'Shabbat. But I had a Braita that seemed to indicate that maybe that they do agree. And then I pushed it away, and then I said, no, but maybe it's true, and I'm not sure. So now Tashma, Shema here, I think when I was in day school, we also were told that it means come and listen. But Shema here really means to learn, right? To come and learn. Like when we use the word also in Hebrew, we say like lehishtamea. It doesn't mean to hear itself. It means to, that it implies, right? Mishtamea is it implies. But Shema in Aramaic has that has that connotation or has the indication of learning. So come and learn, meaning come and learn from this brisa. I haven't been able to be machriya from these other braitot about this question of how the Chachamim hold regarding Sam b'Shabbat, which would be a support for Rabbi Yochanan. So come, I'll learn it from this brayta that Rabbi Bar Shmuel learned. Okay, so that's why we're bringing the brayta. So what does the brayta tell us? Michael Schwartz. So what does the brayta tell us? Bar Shehiricha.
A pregnant woman that smells a meat and develops a craving, we feed her until her soul is settled, until she's satisfied. Someone that's bitten by a rabid dog, we feed him the lobe of the liver of the dog. And someone who's stricken with the in his mouth, we place on his in his mouth a drug on Shabbat. And these are the words of Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yossi, and they were said in the name of that he said in the name of Rav Matya ben Charash. And the Chachamim Omrim in this, but not in another.
In this and not in another. So just what if I were to expand the words of the Chachamim? What would be a full sentence of the Chachamim? What are they saying?
In one of the three, they agree, but not in another.
Right. Bazu. So here, Bazu is singular. So Chachamim are saying we agree with this one, but not. And here we'll say Bacher. It would mean any other.
Okay. This could be
okay. Right, because it doesn't have to say acherot. It could just say acheret. It means this one and no other, right, or any other.
Oh,
so
no other.
so now, yes.
What we saw until now is that the logic is not clear; it's unclear. So they bring another example, and the logic again is unclear.
Oh,
so,
but wait,
so
wait. No.
What did they win in this?
You're asking a very good question, but the Gemara here, no, but this bright is different. So before we
But again, the bezov
no.
Which
Paul,
the zol?
The Gemara is way ahead of you. The Gemara is way ahead of you. So no, but why is this different? Because now, so first of all, in the other one, it's there are two things that are different. One is that in the previous Braitot, it said be'elu, right? Be'elu ein behem mishum refuah. So that implied that 2 out of 3 are not refuah, and one of them is. Here I know that one of them definitely is a refuah. Okay, so that's the first difference. And now the Gemara says, so now Michael, or actually Paul, because I'm not trying to discriminate against you, Michael Werner. I'll give you your chance to speak also, but I let you speak about other things, but I'm going to have you read last. Paul, go ahead. Bezo.
Which one is it?
On which, right? Which one is
it? Which is this zo, yes?
Yes.
Ilema aubara. Pshita.
So what does ilema mean? Anybody?
I think it means that the zoo is about the pregnant woman.
Wait. No? So let's go through it word by word. Bezu ahiyah. So this, when the Chachamim say bezu, on which? In other words, on which which of the 3 are they referring to?
Which is this zoo? Yes.
Right, which is this so? Ilema. So in Aramaic, ilema literally means what? It could also be split into 2 words. Ilema.
If we say.
If you say, right? If we say aubara, so if you'll say the zoo refers to the pregnant woman, then what? Pshita. Obviously.
Okay.
What's obvious? Ubara, read a little more. Ubara
בא מאיכא למאן דאמר דלא, דלה,
Yeah, Dilo.
אלא,
Right?
דלא, אלא לאו, אסם.
Asam. Shma mina.
שמע מינה.
Okay, so what does that mean? So ubara mi ika lamanda amar delo. So literally that means mi yesh lezesh omer shelo leomer shelo. That is, there's no, but to put it in a positive, it means no one would say no to the ubara. Everybody agrees that ubara shehiricha machilinota ad shetashuv nafsha. In other words,
Yes.
how do I know?
Who would contradict this claim? Yes.
No one,
Would
exactly.
there be anybody who would
Right,
contradict this claim? Yes.
right. Is there anybody who would contradict this claim? And the answer is no,
Mhm.
because this we
No,
learned
of
it was
course
an
not.
earlier, this was
Yeah,
an
we
earlier
know.
Mishnah, and nobody disagreed with this Mishnah.
Mhm.
So there is no manda amar. There is no someone who says that you don't feed an ubara shehiricha on Yom Kippur. Nobody disagrees with that. So when the Chachamim say bezu v'lo b'acheret, that can't be what they're referring to, because
Mhm.
there's no machloket between Rabbi Matya ben Charash and the Chachamim, and that we know that already. So they say, so the Gemara says, Ela lav asam. It must be that they're referring to the sam. And that's what they're saying, bezu.
Assam.
Asam means al sam, right? They're
Mhm.
talking about the sam. Just like we
Why?
said, aheya, right? Ahiya, al eze. So
Mhm.
al sam. That's the ah. The ah is like al in Hebrew. So ela lav asam. Must be when the Chachamim said bezu, the lo bacheret, they meant that we agree with him about the sam, but not about the other one. What's the other one that they don't agree?
The truck.
The other claims,
No, bezo means they agree with him about the sam. We know that they agree with they know they agree with him about the ubara, because everybody holds about the ubara. What's the one that is, what's the roba cheret? What's the other one that they don't agree with him?
the
The kelev shoteh. So it turns out the acheret is really one other thing. That is, ubara shehiricha. So if I look at the Braita, it starts off with ubara shehiricha machina to acheteshuv nafsha, and then I bring two more cases. So the first case, it could be that's not even Divrei Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi Shamar Mishum Rabbi Mati ben Charash. That could just be the Stam Braita, because everybody agrees with that. And then I have these two things: Mishana Shachokel Shoteh and a Choshesh Befiv. And on that, Rabbi Mati ben Charash says that we allow those things, and the Chachamim say we agree with this one and not the other one. So we agree with this one, which is Matilin Lo Sam B'Shabbat, but not the other one. So it turns out that Paul's question is answered. That is, Paul said Bezuv Lo B'Cher. It's also unclear, but actually no, it's different, because I can go through this Braita differently, because like I say now, Ubar Shiricha Machlinato Ad Shetushuv Nafsha, I take that off the table right away. That's not part of the machloket that's being expressed here between the Chachamim and Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yossi. So it leaves only two things. It leaves Chatzer Kaved and leaves Sam. So how do I know that the Chachamim agree with Sam and not with Chatzer Kaved? Because our Mishnah already told us that the Chachamim disagreed with Rabbi Matya ben Charash about Chatzer Kaved. There they disagreed bin Furash, and that's what they mean, bezo v'lo b'acheret. So this is now more
I
conclusive.
don't understand why do they use this expression? What they could say it explicitly, but again they express it as a riddle. I don't understand why they should do that.
Okay, so I think your question is a good question, mostly on the two prior Brightot, where it's really unclear. And I don't have a good answer for you. I really don't know. Here I could argue that it was actually clear, and that's the argument of the Gemara. When they say bezuvu o ba'acheret, here it's clear because of other information I have. But why? You know what? I don't know. I don't have a good answer for you right offhand. My quick answer is not a good answer. The quick answer is that anytime we had a Braita or a Mishnah, as we said many times, we always want to we always want to transmit it in as few words as possible. But the problem is if I transmit it with too few words, then it won't be understandable. And that's your question. So here the Chachamim are so terse, right? Lashon Katsar, it's so terse that now I don't know what it means anymore. Okay, but the point of the Gemara at this point is to say, at least in this case of this Braita, it is clear. It's very clear that the Chachamim are agreeing with Rabbi Mati ben Charash about the case of Sam. So I just want to point out in terms of general learning. So Tashma is something that I'm going to, that's an introduction to usually to a Braita. And I want to bring it in order to try to solve a problem that I presented with. So our problem was that I had these two Braitot, and like we said, we couldn't be machria, we couldn't decide based on these two prior Braitot how to answer our original question about what was the source for Rabbi Yochanan. So Tashema, so come, let's learn it from here. Maybe this is going to be machria for us, and it is. And since it works, so the Gemara concludes with the words Shma Mina, right? Tashma, come, let's learn. Shma Mina, we learn from it. That's the conclusion that brackets this part of the sugya. So Shma Mina in almost every case, QED, in almost every case, that means that's the Gemara's final conclusion. There are exceptions, but usually if a Gemara ends off by saying Shma Mina, that means that's the Gemara's final conclusion. And now, to finish this off, now we'll have Michael Werner. You'll read this last part, Rav Ashi Amar. But you do have to be unmuted.
That would be helpful. Rav Ashi Amar, Matminin Name Daika. V'od Amar Rabbi Matya ben Harash, Hahoshesh B'fiv Mativin Lo Sam B'Shabbat, V'lo Peligi Rabbanan Ale. V'im Eta Difligi Rabbanam Ale. The Arvitnu, the Arvintu, Belit Ninku, Belit Palgu Rabbanan Sefer Shema Mina.
So yes, those are tongue twisters.
Yes.
The Arvin Huvli, Nin Huvli, Palgu, Rabbanan B'Seifa, they're a little bit, they don't come trippingly off the tongue, as you might say. But so what is Rav Ashi saying? Matnitin Nami Daika. We in Yeshivish we say Daika, but maybe it's Daika, but it doesn't matter. Matnitin Nami Daika. Our Mishnah also Daika, meaning so it's this word the dayek, right, which means to express, to be explicit. And in this case, a diuk, right? It's the idea of the diuk, which is it's something you learn from close examination, right? So our Mishnah also has this implication upon closer examination. So what was the what Mishnah? Michael Werner, you can just tell us, Vodomar.
So this is basically what Rabbi Matya Bar Harash said. Somebody who is stricken by an illness in his mouth, we give him drug in his mouth on Shabbat.
Okay, so that's the Mishnah. So Rav Ashi says, I can be medayek from this Mishnah. I can extrapolate by dint of a close reading from this Mishnah the same conclusion that the Rabbanan agree with Rabbi Batya ben Harash about Metilin Sam b'Shabbat. What's the diuk? V'lo pligi Rabbanan alei. What does that mean?
They don't object.
So pligi means they don't disagree. So in Hebrew, we'd say lo cholkim, right? Not like the word lachlok can mean to disagree. It's the basis of the word bachloket. And what is the word lachlok? What's the basis? What's the basic meaning of lachlok? To divide, right? Lechalek. When you're cholek with somebody, it means that you have a division of opinion. So the word halag, which also we have in Hebrew, plukta. So what's a
miflaga? But
right?
it's also pelek, but you have to
Exactly. To divide. It's also the word the root halag means to divide. It's the same concept in a different word. Like just like the chalek is to divide, the faleg is to divide, and in Aramaic they use the same concept with a different word. So below pligi, that's my linguistic interjection here. Lo pligi rabbanan alei, the rabbanan rabbanim lo chilku alav. They didn't disagree with it.
The plagim are the affluence of nahar gadol.
Yeah, things that split off, that are divided from, that they split from, right? So liflog is to split, just like the chalek is to split, right? To split, to divide. So what's the point? Rashi says, actually, the Rashi is saying, you know what? We really could have just learned this all from the Mishnah, because what did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah said, "Va'od amar Rabbi Mati ben Charash choshesh b'fiv b'tilin lo sam b'Shabbat v'lo pligi Rabbanan alei." The Rabbanan didn't disagree with Rabbi Matya in the Mishnah about Matilin Sam b'Shabbat. I'll just finish the translation. V'imita de pligi Rabbanan alei v'im, literally v'im yesh sheharabbanim chilku alav. If it was true that the Rabbanan did disagree with Rabbi Matya ben Harash about Sam, then li'arvinhu v'li'ninhu v'li'palgu Rabbanan b'seifa. Then they should have mixed in. In other words, then their words should have been mixed in to the text of the Mishnah and learned li'ninhu. Let it be mixed in and let it be learned, so that the palgu Rabbanan b'seifa, so that the Rabbanan would disagree with him at the end. Shma mina. What does the Gemara mean? So let's just take a quick look back at the Mishnah. So what did the Mishnah say? Mishnah shachokel shoteh. That's the Tanakama, right? Rabbi Mati ben Charash matir. ועוד אמר רבי מתי ben Charash, החושש בגרונו מטילים בתוך פיו בשבת. So Rav Ashi is saying, if the Chachamim disagreed with some, the Mishnah would not have been worded this way. It would have said, it would have said that it would have brought the case of Kelev Shoteh and Sam b'Shabbat, Divrei Rabbi Mati ben Charash, v'Chachamim Osrim. In other words, if they didn't agree with Rabbi Mati ben Charash, then they should have, their words should have been mixed into that part of the Mishnah, and they would have paskened at the end, right? We would know by the end of the Mishnah that they disagreed with Rabbi Mati ben Charash on both of those things by virtue of the fact that the Mishnah is laid out this way, where it says somebody who's bitten by a Kelev Shoteh, ein machluyunato mechatzer kaved shelo, Rabbi Mati ben Charash matir. Essentially, that's at that point I know that the Kelev Shoteh is the point of contention, it's the point of disagreement between Rabbi Mati ben Charash and the Chachamim. So the Va'oda Mar Rabbi Mati ben Charash, that's outside of the machloket. Because if the Chachamim disagreed with it, like I said, like the Rav Ashi is saying, the Mishnah would have been mixed up differently, been ordered differently, so that the Chachamim come at the end and say, we disagree with everything the Rabbi Mati ben Charash said. And so Rav Ashi
again have said that Rabbi Matya ben Charash matir, also on the sun. But since they didn't say that, so it's everybody agrees.
So everybody agrees. So that's Rav Ashi's point. And he also ends up by saying, Shma mina, I learned from this. In other words, I learned from being medayek in the language of the Mishnah that this is how the Chachamim held. So what's our conclusion? We answered now our question, how did Rabbi Yochanan allow taking some b'Shabbat for tzafidna? He was relying on the fact that our Mishnah held that you can take some b'Shabbat, and that everybody held that way. It was said by Rabbi Mati ben Charash, but the Chachamim also must have agreed with him. And so now I have
because it didn't say that Aval Rabbi Matya ben Charash matir. On that he didn't say it.
It's because it said right, because it said Va'oda Mar Rabbi Matya ben Charash, and that's split off from the first part of the Mishnah where the Chachamim disagreed with him, and there is no statement of the Chachamim after Rabbi Matya's statement about Sam b'Shabbat to say that they disagreed with him. So the whole statement of Va'oda Mar Matya ben Charash stands by itself, and since no one disagrees with it, means the Chachamim must have agreed with it by default, and it was left in the Mishnah because Rabbi Matya ben Charash was the one who said it. And so now I understand both from this Braita, where the Chachamim said Bezu v'lo ba'acheret, but also because of an absence of a disagreement in the Mishnah, that the Chachamim agree with Rabbi Matya ben Charash. So it means everyone holds that you're allowed to put Sam b'Shabbat for somebody's Choshesh b'Fiv. So Rabbi Yochanan, who had Safidna, he allowed this treatment on Shabbat, not because Rabbi Matya ben Charash said it, but because the Chachamim agreed with Rabbi Matya ben Charash. Because I know
this
there were
argument
other things.
is much is the clearest of all.
So the last one is the clearest
The
of
last
all.
one, yes.
Yes.
It's the most convincing.
It is the most convincing, and it's interesting because it took till Rav Ashi for the Gemara to say what was really clearest from the Mishnah itself.
Rav Ashi is very late.
Rav Ashi is very late. He's the last generation.
Yes.
He was one of the Orchei, he was the Orech of the Gemara, right?
So
He
you
was
have to wait until Rabbi Ashi for this
to get
diuk, which is the clearest what you could have.
Yesh Loma. So it's very late, so I'm not going to look at Rashi. Everybody's welcome to look at Rashi. There's not that much here. And then next week, we're going to continue in the next part of the Sugya. B'li Neder, I will send out sheets for the next part of the Sugya. And that's it. So thank you, everybody.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for coming and your contributions, and I hope to see you next week. And everybody, I guess I'll wish everyone either I should wish you an easy fast, or I wish that there's no fast because Mashiach will come in the meantime, and then we'll have a celebration, right? So whichever comes first, right? In which case, right, Tisha B'Av becomes a great cause for celebration. So
A celebration would be very good news.
it would be very good news for all of us. I
Mm.
may have told you this this little anecdote, but I'll just mention it. When I was still in Boston and I was davening by Rav Savitsky, and I remember the first night of Tisha B'Av, I stayed after he had like a little Beit Midrash in his basement, right? So it was like a small minyan. And so I was helping him to clean up after people left. And this would have been like 1980 or sometime in the early 80s. And somebody had left behind a Hebrew English keynote that they had, which you can still see. And I don't remember the publisher, but I'm sure you've all seen it. It's one of the first recent, like some 40 years ago, but it was one of the more recent translations of Keynote with notes and everything. And it was a nice hardbound copy with a nice dust jacket and everything. And I remember Rav Savitsky held it up and he was looking at it, quizzing, you know, questioningly, and he's saying, he said to me, and I've since heard this from other sources, but he told me firsthand, he said, when we were in Europe, kinos, and you've probably also seen these, the kinos were printed like little like pamphlets, and they were not even hardbound. They were like they were stapled together or glued together. He said every year we would read kinos and then we'd put them into Geniza because we prayed that that would be the last time that we'd have to use them. We so wanted to believe that Mashiach would come. In the meantime, he says, so I don't understand. So here they're printing this book like it's forever. Who would want to have a keynote that's so beautiful and that you wouldn't want to throw it out? So with that, we should all have a Geula Krova.
Oh, man. All right, thank you. Good night.
Laila Tov.